Today's chat is brought to you by the support of all our Twitch subscribers. Through the patronage you provide the Focus Fire chat team through the Twitch platform, we are able to provide you with the weekly podcast as well as the website and other aspects of Focus Fire chat. If you have any interest in becoming a subscriber of the FFC and gaining access to some exclusive features over in the Discord server, please be sure to visit our Twitch account and click on the subscribe button. If you're an Amazon Prime member, remember that you do have a free subscription to Twitch every month that can be used for this. And for those of you who are already subscribers, thank you again for your generosity. You may have heard the whispers of guardians gathering in the shadows, exploring the mysteries of this world and the worlds which surround us. We are all in search of truth. Sometimes we need to focus that search, focus that fire. And so we come together. Join us. Join the discussion. Welcome to Focused Fire Chat. Welcome back for episode 31 of Extra Lore, recorded live on October 5th, 2018 over on twitch.tv/FocusFireChat. As always, I want to give a big shout out to our live chat here with us tonight. Thank you so much for joining us once again. Our topic for tonight's episode is going to be a look at Cyberpunk 2077. But first, let's run through a quick introduction of those on the show for tonight. As always, this is your host, Blue Crew 86. Next up, we have our own master of social media, the one and only Green-Eyed Music Lover. Green, I hope you're doing well. How has the week treated you so far?
Hey, it's been good. It's been good. I'm 569. We went through 2 parts of the raid last Saturday. We're going to try again tomorrow, see if we can get to Riven. And we're going to continue the grind because that's what we're living now. But yay!
Well, rounding out the usual team, we have the man who is known far and wide as the Destiny Lore Content Cop, the one and only Beard Grizzly. Beard, how are you doing tonight?
You know, one of these days I'm going to actually make a video about that. Actually, I've already got one.
Yes!
I do.
So it's going to be a version of, like, Guardian School?
No, it's...
Is it bad cop, worse cop?
No, I guess it's going to be more something like, hey, I need to rectify a situation here that somebody decided to cause, and here's how we're going to fix it, and this person is going to apologize in their next video or something. I don't know. I can't force them to do anything. Not really, though.
So now, the other thing I wanted to see is Beard putting out a YouTube video of a Reno 911 themed.
Oh, God.
Oh, man. Well,
I'm already playing around with Machinima. I don't need any more excuses to mess around with it more. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
Well, I guess not last week, but this week we had a quick question about our communities, well, or Green's followers over at Twitter, experience with the Green, correct me here, the tabletop version of Cyberpunk, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the question was basically, does anyone have experience with it? And the answer was a resounding
no.
Nope. Nope.
41 votes for this one, and I only had it out for 2 hours. So if you missed it and you're like, "Wait, I didn't see it," no, don't worry. I literally put it out today, 2 hours before the show started. And we had 41 people who voted, and 90% of them said, "Nope, never tried it." And granted, the original game came out in the 80s, so I'm not super surprised, and I know there's been versions of it, but there's so many different tabletop RPGs, and I know it's, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's similar to Shadowrun?
Yeah, actually, yeah, so Shadowrun, actually, I'm going to get myself in trouble. I believe Shadowrun is an offshoot of this.
Yes.
I think I want to say, because I know like the genre from a literary standpoint, Cyberpunk was primary, But I think from a take, because Cyberpunk was it 2013 was the first iteration, and that was 1988, and then 2020 came out in 93.
94? No.
Yeah.
No. 94 is one of the events happened in 94.
Right. Yeah. Story. So like Shadowrun. Let's just put it this way: Shadowrun is around the same. It's thematically the same. Very, very similar. Shadowrun tends to be much more fantastical in the sense of there's a lot more heavy. It's a lot more fantasy based. It's more science fantasy. Cyberpunk tends to be more science fiction. We will be getting into that distinction here after the quick intro. That is actually a question that we had. So we will be kind of talking about that distinction. But so like they are both similar and very distinct in their own way. But yes, I mean, you have like Cyberpunk, you have Shadowrun, you have like Slay Industries. Those are the big ones that I remember playing. And I know there's tons more. I mean, Steampunk is out there. It's just, yeah. But yes, it's very similar to anyone who has had experience or exposure to Shadowrun, and not Cyberpunk. Yes, Cyberpunk is it's like comparing Star Wars and Star Trek, right? Star Wars is more fantasy. Star Trek is more hard science, which is, I'll probably get in trouble for that, but whatever.
It's okay.
It's not wrong. Weird. I mean, you can't get mad at me for being wrong on that one. So, no, I mean, start arguing, yes.
Right. Anyway, moving on.
We will be there forever if we get into that argument.
Let's go.
So obviously, So that being said, like obviously there's not a lot of exposure for our particular community to Cyberpunk, which is actually kind of the point of Extra Lore, right? It's to kind of branch out to see what other games are out there. And I will be completely transparent. I've been fighting the urge to go down the rabbit hole of really getting into the lore of the Cyberpunk series, because it's a very fascinating series. And just the genre in and of itself is one of my favorite genres from a literary point of view. And that's just, that's just my own thing. But, so obviously I'm really hyped to actually talk about this. I know that from the little bit that our two hosts here, Beard and Green, have managed to go through the multiple pages of notes that I've given them, I think that they're also excited. But we'll find out. But let's run through our topic intro as usual, and then we're going to jump right into it. I think we're going to start off really with a introduction. One of the preliminary questions that I've gotten from our Discord chat, and then also a little bit on Twitter, has been, what is Cyberpunk? Not the series, but the genre itself. What is that? So we're going to dive into that immediately following these topic intros. In our last Extra Lore episode, we took a brief look at God of War. If you ever miss an episode and would like to catch up, please be sure to check out FocusFireChat.com for archives, articles, and links to the other aspects of Focus Fire Chat. If you don't mind, please rate and, if you can, review the show on iTunes, Podbean, or whichever podcasting app you use to enjoy podcasts. Reviews in particular are extremely helpful as they help us show up on charts, and that helps others find the FFC community. To those of you who have already taken the time to leave us a review, thank you again. As many of you already know, Focus Fire Chat is a cross-community gathering, where the intent is to offer a week-long, in-depth view of a particular subject from within the lore of Destiny and other games. With the Extra Lore series, we delve into a game series other than Destiny for a full month, giving the group a chance to get a feel for the other games that our community loves to play. As with the normal chat topics, Extra Lore is decided by the group through a monthly poll. After the month's discussion has come to an end, we get together to stream a high-level summary of the chat for those who were unable to participate. Please be sure to also give some support to the other podcasts in the Guardian Radio Network, links of which can be found on our website. If you're a fan of lore in all its various forms, be sure to also check out thelorenetwork.com, where you can find a wide variety of some amazing content that covers a number of different titles and mediums. Extra Lore for October is going to be a discussion on the lore of Bloodborne, so be sure to jump into the Discord server and weigh in on that. With all that out of the way, where does everyone think that the best place to start is when looking for a really basic understanding of Cyberpunk 2077? Alright, so like I said before we jumped into there, we're going to kind of start off with really a definition of what is cyberpunk. It's a pretty common question when we talk about this particular game and genre in general. But I do want to preface this. I know people love me when I preface things like this, but I want to call out the fact that this is a dystopian future. This game will be dealing with political topics. And so basically, I'm not endorsing any particular political view. I am going to try to stay 100% just in the game world. So if it sounds like I'm endorsing a particular political view, call me whatever you want, but that's just me saying that so no one gets their panties in a knot. Anyways, cyberpunk. Cyberpunk is a genre, or a subgenre technically, of science fiction that features advanced science and technology in an urban dystopian future. On the one side, you generally have powerful mega corporations and private security forces, and then on the other side, you have this dark and gritty underworld of illegal trade, gangs, drugs, and just general vice. In between all of this is politics, corruption, and social upheaval. And this is generally summed up, you see this in a lot of cyberpunk works. It's generally summed up in the quote, high tech, low life. Originally a literary movement, cyberpunk has actually become a subcultural organism with a life of its own that has basically grown to focus on the blending of low life and high tech. The term itself can be traced to a short story, Cyberpunk, by Bruce Bethke. And then there are, of course, what's considered the, quote, core cyberpunk authors, end quote, that are generally accepted to have laid the groundwork of the cyberpunk movement. Primarily along them is an individual by the name William Gibson. Gibson is actually considered to be the founder of cyberpunk with his 1984 release of Neuromancer, which drew influence from the existing punk subculture and the early hacker culture that was actually gaining momentum at that time. Then you also have Bruce Sterling, Pat Cardigan, Rudy Rucker, John Shirley, Louis Shiner. You have people such as Philip K. Dick. Blade Runner is another really one that a lot of people are going to recognize. In the current generation of TV shows, you have Blade Runner, and then Altered Carbon is another one that a lot of people are probably familiar with.
Aeon Flux.
Aeon Flux is...
Would it be considered cyberpunk?
Yes, it would. It would. I kind of consider Aeon Flux to be kind of its own. Are we talking about like the story, or are we talking about the animated series?
Talking about the story.
So the story would be cyberpunk. The animated series is kind of its own oddity. It's amazing, but it's its own like thing. Which is, it's really good. If you guys haven't seen the original Aeon Flux anime, I really highly recommend it. Don't go into it expecting a mature theme though. Just fair warning. Just fair warning on that one.
Very Ghost in the Shell level.
Yeah, even more so in some regards, because Aeon Flux is... God, I'm going to get sucked in the rabbit hole of that one. Aeon Flux is so random. Even watching Aeon Flux in the right order, you still have to watch it a couple times to understand what exactly is going on. But in regards to the dystopian commentary on social norms and the use of cyber technology and nanotechnology in a way, it definitely falls within the realm of cyberpunk. I would almost argue that it's almost more of a nanopunk subgenre, which I'll get into just a little bit. It's there's a couple. So cyberpunk is a subgenre of science fiction. There are subgenres of cyberpunk. Yep. So they're sub in some cases sub genres of science fiction, and this is normal for literary genres. They'll splinter off and then splinter off and splinter off. And Aeon Flux, I think, kind of transcends the line between what's called nanopunk and cyberpunk, and I'll get into that in just a second, because that is actually one of the questions that I want to hear your guys' points of view on. But real quick, to jump back to Gibson. The reason Gibson is considered to be kind of commonly considered to be the founder of Cyberpunk is he's actually the individual who coined the term cyberspace in Neuromancer. And it basically, he used that phrase in Neuromancer and it just resonated with the cyberpunk world. And so what we want to do real quick is if we break that into its roots, we'll see really a definition starting to emerge, right? So you have cyber, and the reference here is to technology, which is cyberspace, cybernetic enhancements, biotechnology, nanotechnology, all just technology in general. And then punk. Punk is generally defined as the reference to the general people and overall attitude that was found within the punk movement. Protagonists will obviously tend to be the outsiders, the anti-heroes, dissenters, misfits. And basically the common theme between all protagonists who fall within a blank punk theme is that there is a subversive nature that all of them have. They are the outliers of the bell curve, and they are the ones that are kind of like the anti-hero before the anti-hero was really conceived of really fully. And so that's where that kind of comes from. So when you put those together, you have a dystopian, Mad Max-esque type thing.
Could we possibly say they never asked for this?
I never asked for this.
I had to get it in there somewhere.
In cyber, and the funny thing is in Cyberpunk, there is actually a, to blend that with the Mad Max reference, there is actually a in the tabletop version. I don't know. So fair warning, we don't know a lot about 2077 as a video game in and of itself. We know bits and pieces because we've obviously had, nearly
30 books.
Well, we have 30 books, but I'm also thinking, what is that? 10, 20, 30 years of the RPG at this point.
And it's been 3 editions.
3 editions.
Point, hasn't it?
Yes, it's been, it was 2013, 2020, and then 3.0/Firestorm. And Firestorm has been basically softly confirmed that it has been retconned. Majority of it, there are bits and pieces, and I'm going to get into that with the corporate wars. But Firestorm was mostly retconned. But there is a group within that who are basically road warriors. They're called gypsies. And that's what they are. They are like the Mad Max-esque survivors of this country that has fallen apart at its seams. And yes, they did not ask for it. They were actually literally born into it. But real quick, one of the questions that we got asked, I put a call out in the Discord, and Taylor B had actually asked, let me make sure I get this correct. He wants to know our thoughts on the parallels and differences between cyberpunk and other punk genres. It's an excellent question because there are, like we kind of been saying, there's a lot of nuanced differences, right? The primary offshoots of what I would consider the quote punk subgenre within science fiction is obviously cyberpunk, which we've kind of talked about here. The next one would be biopunk. This is basically cyberpunk, but it's dominated by biotechnology. This actually so cyberpunk was like late 80s, and then biopunk quickly followed in the early 90s. And it's seen as building on the biotechnology instead of information technology. The storyline will follow individuals who are changed via genetic manipulation rather than mechanical manipulation. So there's that. And then steampunk, which has taken off significantly in just cultural wise in these last, I think, last 5-10 years. Steampunk is a huge thing, not necessarily in RPGs, though you do have Dishonored, for example, would be considered a steampunk game. And this is a world in which it's set in an alternate history Victorian era that basically combines the anachronistic technology with cyberpunk's bleak film noir worldview. So you have the dystopian worldview, but you have like a throwback to the gears and cogs. You'll see a lot of those. That's steampunk. Nanopunk, which is kind of where I was mentioning with Aeon Flux. Nanopunk is something that is very similar to biopunk, but instead of the use of biotechnology, It describes a world in which the use of biotechnology is limited or prohibited, and only nanites and nanotechnology is actually in wild use. So, where in Biopunk you have biotechnology, nanotechnologies will often coexist. So, like Biopunk will be bio and nanotechnology are kind of working together. Nanopunk biotechnology has been basically banned, and right now it's honestly not a huge thing. The genre is actually more concerned with like artistic and physiological impact of nanotechnology, which in and of itself is a rather new conception. This was definitely not in the minds of the 1980s, 1990s authors. I mean, it kind of was, but not to the degree that it is now. So right now, Nanopunk is more concerned with like the actual philosophical debates of nanotechnology more than the actual technology itself. So those are kind of like the four major punk subgenres. So I guess I'm going to kind of hand it over to Green and then Beard on any, what are your thoughts, I guess, on the parallels and differences? You know, do you see, are there pretty clear ones? You know, what are your thoughts on those? Which one are you interested in most, I guess?
When I was like first introduced to the concept of steampunk and whatnot, the person who described it to me basically said it's a society trying to cope with like, it's not quite a post-apocalyptic society, but it's one that is like super struggling with all sorts of different things, and it's kind of on the downslide of all the different things and rebuilding. And the differences between all the punks mainly lies in its utilization of technology, what it's using. So like you were talking about the nanotech is going to be what is used for nanopunk versus cybertech, which is using cybernetics, versus steampunk, which is very turn of the century using steam engine type technology. Yes, it's like way different than turn of the century type stuff, but at the same time, it's that level of technology utilized in that world, in that kind of semi-futuristic, semi-alternate timeline type feel to it. Personally, I've always liked steampunk just because I think it's fascinating to see people alter using the technology of like the turn of the century, but at the same time create a utterly fanciful, like way more advanced than you would think would be possible with that technology type thing. I don't know. That's just kind of like, always been.
With steampunk, you're really quick to jump in there. With steampunk, you also see a lot of like airships.
Yes.
Dirigibles. Dirigibles is just a fun word to say. So you'll see a lot of that too. To kind of explain, we were kind of talking about video games. So like steampunk would be, you know, Dishonored. Your nanopunk, I really hesitate to even say anything, but I think it would be more of like a Deus Ex kind of thing, if anything. I mean, it, right?
Maybe,
I mean, like
maybe the early ones,
right? Well, yeah, no,
so
not
like the ones that like Human Revolution. Divided. No way.
Those are cybers.
No way.
Those are cybernetics.
Yeah.
Because that was the whole point of Human. What was it? Divided. Like that was the whole thing, was cybers versus humans. But yeah, the early ones, which is where you kind of saw Adam get like a lot of focus on subcutaneous enhancements and stuff like that, like his armor skin and stuff like that. And I mean, like I said, like I there's not a lot out there in regards to nanopunk that I'm currently aware of. It's not a genre that I've paid a lot of attention to be fair. But
it's not a very well-known genre either.
Right. It's kind of a new genre. Not to say that I'm not interested in it. I just haven't had a lot of copious free time to pay attention to it. So those are Steampunk's Dishonored. Nanopunk is kind of a hard one. Biopunk is really easy. Bioshock. Bioshock is a biopunk game. Because the whole thing of the way that, especially the first one, the way that you gain the abilities that you gain is through intravenous injection of different chemicals. That is biopunk in and of itself.
Interestingly enough, BioShock Infinite, right? That was kind of a mixture of the biopunk and steampunk.
Steampunk, right? Yeah, and you'll see, and that's kind of the other thing that Taylor was getting at too. You often see a very interesting blend. Really, honestly, the only ones that don't seem to really blend well are bio and nanopunk. And that's because nanopunk focuses on the suppression of technology, or the suppression of biotechnology, and the like proliferation of nanotechnology, whereas biopunk kind of sees everything working together. Steampunk sees everything working together with the overlying theme of the steam revolution and steam engines. And then cyberpunk's more of like the ethereal internet and stuff like that. Mirror's Edge is also a cyberpunk-esque game. There's a lot of cyberpunk games. So, but anyways, Beard, what would you?
Cyberpunk has always been a portion of my life, like, period. But I think we kind of know that right now with me, between like Blade Runner and a few others just kind of growing up. But for me in particular as well, I played Hideo Kojima's Snatcher at a young age. And that is another one that is basically based off of the ideas of like what Blade Runner was all about. Just taking it to the nth degree and mixing in Terminator along with it. Which in some cases you can even say that Terminator is a kind of a post-apocalyptic cyberpunk, I guess. And even then it kind of like dabbles in some other functions besides. But no, personally, like, Cyberpunk has been like bread and butter for me, and at least for like my I've always unfortunately had a very cynical view of the world. I could see us getting to that point eventually. I could see us getting to the point with like how it was with Mass Effect. I could see us getting to that point with like how it was with Dead Space. And all of them could really be in some way, like, even if you stretch it, Dead Space is also a very biopunk kind of game. There is a lot of looking into the genome, looking into how DNA recombinates, etc. Recombinant DNA. It's dead DNA, dead cells that are coming back to life and reforming into something completely new. But that is something that I think has always interested me about, I guess, more, especially in sci-fi, like the punk series. But Cyberpunk, hands down, whenever I'm feeling down, I kind of go back towards Cyberpunk to begin with, just to kind of look at it and go, yeah, it could be a lot worse. Let's get back to life.
Wow.
I'm so glad that I was going to say that, because like, I'm like, hey, if you're feeling down, at least you didn't ask for this. Well
done.
The other thing, though, which is, I think, interesting, is that a lot of the cyberpunks and the steampunks, they are very fashion forward. Like, it is an era where people, they're having such a rough time because it is kind of like a dystopian future, or a dystopian world. And how do they cope? They are stylish. Like,
well, that's, I mean, from a hierarchy of needs, right? I mean, that makes sense, because it's one of the only things they can control.
Right.
And that also plays, I was going to say, it also plays into the punk genre-esque, that stylistic, subversive theme. Sorry, Beard, what were you going to say?
That's okay. I was just going to say that, like, a lot of really, I guess a lot of the punks, but at least a lot of the cyberpunks especially, don't seem like they pull a lot of punches. They definitely like to cover some topics that you kind of get curious about, like very adult-oriented themed topics that we will never discuss on the show, most likely, that are just, you start to think about the implications of like what that kind of technology can do for some of the seedier terrible parts of like how humanity is, and you're just like, oh god, this is no, thank you. But I just feel like as a glimpse into humanity and how dark we can get, I think that's the entire point of like what the cyberpunk genre has kind of showcased for us. And it's not saying that like every single one of them is awful that way, but so many of them do gear themselves that way, because I cannot see a world where we get more infused with technology than we already are, where it doesn't get worse.
Right, and I think that
apparently
that also,
I am not alone in that.
Well, and
idea.
I think that ties into the whole dystopian thing too, that the predominantly kind of comes into, because, and we're gonna I can dovetail this into Cyberpunk 2077 pretty easily. But Green, did you have something real quick?
I was just gonna say, it's like we kind of are slowly moving into that anyway.
Okay,
as actual having cybernetics, because my grandpa has a cybernetic type heart. He has a heart that is not anything but mechanical. So I guess it's not really cybernetic. It would be more steampunkish in some ways. But anyway.
Well, I think it was about a month or so ago, I had mentioned on the show, there was a TED Talk that I had listened to about cybernetic limbs and how they have pretty much in the past, I want to say past year and a half, they've revolutionized how they program it to pick up the neurological signs of the individual wearing them. And so now it has gotten to a point where, and I'll see if I can dig up the link and put it in show notes, because it's a very interesting TED Talk. The guy who is doing the talk is actually talking about a rock climber who fell, which, it's a terrible thing, but he fell from a very, very bad place and had to actually have, I believe, both his legs. I want to say it was both his legs amputated. It was very bad. And as part of the project that they were working on, they actually reattached the limbs, or not reattached, they attached cybernetic limbs, and they have now the technology that the climber actually can feel the sensation through the limbs. So it's gotten to the point now with technology where they've actually developed a way that the individual can actually feel the cybernetic cybernetic limbs, and the guy in question was actually able to not only go back to rock climbing, he actually climbed back over the spot that he had fallen from and successfully climbed up all the way with a double prosthetics. So it's gotten to the point now in today's world, in reality, we have now proven the capacity to artificially attach a cybernetic limb in which the individual in question is capable of feeling the sensation. To kind of dovetail this back into Cyberpunk, the actual game series, kind of a high-level summary of Cyberpunk as a series is Cyberpunk 2077. It's a single-player RPG developed by CD Projekt Red, which most people will recognize that name as being from the creators of Witcher.
Witcher 3, right? Or just Witcher?
Actually, the whole series.
Of them. Really?
That was
I thought they just did 3.
No, Witcher 2, and Witcher 3. They were all 3 of them.
They're highly noted for 3 because critically it was the most successful of them all. However, Witchers 1 and 2 did very well, but
2
it wasn't
is
until
amazing.
The third one, though, was where they really started to finally develop a lot of gameplay elements that made a lot of sense and weren't quite as wonky. Because that was always one of the biggest complaints, like gameplay-wise, it was tough to stomach.
So anyways, this is a project that they just recently, not recently, but have acquired in the last few years. And it's going to be an adaptation of a 1988 tabletop RPG called Cyberpunk 2020. Excuse me. Cyberpunk 2020 was actually, to kind of explain this a little bit, we've been hinting at it, but Cyberpunk 2020 was a role-playing game that was heavily inspired by novels of Philip K. Dick and William Gibson, in particular 1982's Blade Runner, the film. Another inspiration was the novel Hardwire by Walter John Williams. And actually, Walter John Williams helped playtest the original iteration of Cyberpunk. I think it was 2013 at that time. Hardwire was in turn written as homage to, I believe it's Roger Zelazny's Damnation Alley. So it's like this kind of staggered. This person inspired this person, was inspired by this person, who was inspired by this, and all that. Cyberpunk 2020 takes place in the year 2020, and the game's default setting is the fictional Night City. At the time, it's a city of 5 million people on the west coast of the United States that's located somewhere between Los Angeles and San Francisco. And it's basically described as being near San Jose, but the map actually puts it closer to, I believe, Monterey. And then later supplements in the game have actually contained information about the rest of the U.S. and the world, which we mentioned at the top of the show. Whereas in Cyberpunk 2077, it focuses on Night City. The actual tabletop RPG takes place. It's almost global, and to be honest, at this point. So the overall summary of the tabletop is following. It goes on to say, following a vast socioeconomic collapse and a period of martial law, the United States government has had to rely on several megacorporations to survive, and this basically has given those megacorporations a variable carte blanche to operate as they will. So it has transferred the political power from the government to these corporations. And so that's where we kind of see 2077 kind of get introduced. What is going on here is that it is going to be set 57 years later, still in Night City. So we're still in that dystopian location of Night City, California. And this, in this iteration of the title, has at its outset a more limited number of districts than the older version. There are some shared with the traditional layout of Night City that we saw previously in the tabletop. But there, at the moment, I believe there are only 6 regions, and we'll get into those when I dive into Night City a little bit deeper. Players are going to assume the role of V, who is a mercenary that is introduced by the developers as a, quote, cyberpunk taking their first steps into becoming an urban legend in a world of cyber-enhanced street warriors, tech-savvy netrunners, and corporate life hackers, end quote. The other big thing that this is going to kind of deviate from CD Projekt Red's history is that this is going to be a first-person perspective. So through that first-person perspective, players are going to witness Night City, the American megacity in the free state of California that's being controlled by corporations and unassailed by both the laws of the country and the state. So conflict from rampant gang wars and its ruling entities contending for dominance have etched their own legacy over the decades. In the city, robotics are responsible for everyday aspects like waste collection, maintenance, and public transportation. Homelessness abounds, but does not preclude the poor from modifying themselves with technology, which has brought people to addiction and violence. If they become a threat, the armed force psycho squads deal with them. Because of the constant threat of physical harm, all citizens are allowed to own and openly carry firearms in public. So that's a very high-level summary of it. Before I start jumping into... So I'm going to kind of say what we're going to walk way through, and then I want to open it up to Green and Beard to make sure I don't miss anything. So we kind of looked at the high-level summary. I want to look at a bit of, let me make sure I have this. So that was kind of the history of the title there. I'm going to talk about the general setting, which I have included Night City and basically technology. So I'm going to run through some technology pieces. The major questions from the chat, which we did already answer, so we'll skip that piece. I have political environment, this is going to be a big one for Night City. Because this explains a lot of the history with Night City and all the megacorps. I'm not going to necessarily probably get into detail with the megacorps that we do know exist already in game, because we have seen some of them, but we'll touch on some of the big ones. And then I do kind of want to talk about the character V. We know very little about it, and I actually want to talk why we know very little about it, because that is actually one of the biggest selling points for Cyberpunk 2077 is what we know and why we only know so much about V. So before I jump into Night City and the history of that, Green, Beard, did I forget anything as far as a general high-level summary that you guys can think of?
Easy way to say it, the government has kind of failed us, and everybody's adapting in their own way, mainly by adding cybernetics. difference between the one that we're doing right now, or like the video game versus the tabletop game. And when you were taking cybernetics in the video game, you would have the cyberpsychosis that would happen after so many cybernetics that were added to your character, which is what led to the cyber, or this, is it cyber police or whatever? What were they called?
Psycho squads.
Psycho squads. They were actually meant to go and take out people who had gone to that cyber psychosis. There we go. They were the ones that were in charge of getting rid of them because you cray, and we don't want to deal with you anymore.
And you're enhanced. You're an enhanced individual who's insane. That never goes over well. That's never a good combination.
But beyond that, I think we have a pretty decent rundown to start things off as far as like where V is compared to what we have so far.
Awesome. All right. So first off, like we said at the top of the show, it's going to be, there's going to be political deviations here. The important thing to remember about Cyberpunk, the series Cyberpunk, is that it is going to overlay with our own reality, and then it's going to deviate around the time right now, about 2010, 2015-ish is where it really strongly kind of goes off on a right angle from where our own world has gone off. Reason being is historically this was written in 1988. So they kind of were projecting forward 20, 25 years. They saw a different way of things going. There's the Cold War. There's all this other stuff going on that they were kind of, they're watching and seeing, oh, hey, we're going downhill. Thankfully, we did not go downhill in the way that they describe here. So taking a closer look at Night City, we find a diverse place with people from all walks of life, backgrounds, and culture. It's described as a seething mass of what had been once the foundations of a utopia. And Night City was founded by a tech giant and visionary who was known as Richard Knight. And the city was originally planned to be known as Coronado City, and was envisioned as the perfect city that would stand as a monument to progress and the power of technology to improve people's lives. His optimistic vision of the future basically is now a haven for violence and corruption. While technically still on American soil, the city does fall completely outside of state and national legal jurisdictions. Here, the corporate...
that's because a lot of the states had seceded at that point. Texas, California, a few other states as well.
And this is where we'll see a lot of the emphasis. I'm curious how Cyberpunk 2077 is going to incorporate that information, because technically it's still canon. Because that is all taking place in 2013 and 2020, the tabletop versions. And so Night City was kind of the first among many who kind of stepped away from the government control. And actually, you'll see with the corporate wars that we're going to talk about here when we get to the political aspect, the corporate wars actually furthered that wedge, because a lot of the corporate wars were basically these mega corporations backing political parties in seeking independence from the governments of the countries within which they were. And so, like, basically you would have two mega corporations who wanted the resources of a particular area. They would ally with a particular sect of rebellion, and then they would pit the political parties against each other while they were basically standing in the wings waiting to take over. It was a very common thing. And there's right now there's been 4 corporate wars, and the 4th one is actually confirmed as still existing. This was the corporate war that took place as part of the Firestorm expansion-esque of the tabletop RPG, which had been retconned. We know that the 4th corporate war has still in effect. We don't know at this time how much of the 4th corporate war is still canon. So we're still waiting to hear basically what aspects of that war are going to be confirmed as being in game. So basically corporations are in charge at this point.
Oh, that seems like a common theme that we've hit multiple times on the show in the last year.
So over the years,
I'm
basically,
not thinking about anything at all. Like Clovis, what?
Yeah, what?
Clovis, what?
So over the years, Night City has been fractured by various corporate conflicts and gang wars. And one of the most notorious of these was actually called the Mob Wars. And the Mob Wars was a campaign that was started in 2009 in which Arasaka, which is one of the mega corporations, Arasaka paramilitaries took to the streets and basically wiped out the mobs that had taken control of the city following the death of Richard Knight. And that had happened in 1998. So the city had been built in 98, 2000-esque, if I remember correctly. Knight had been killed in 98, and that was when they also changed the name from Coronado to Night City in memory of Richard. At that time, though, there was no leadership, so the mobs took over. And basically, it was just chaos, really. And the corporations basically backed out. And then in about 2009, the Mob Wars started. And the Mob Wars was basically Arasaka, who was one of the original founders of Night City, basically had enough. And they were like, we're done. We want our investment back. So starting in 2009, the Mob Wars began. And basically anyone who was caught in between were just left just kind of getting undercover. So this is where you also see a lot of the homelessness start gathering, because those caught between the mobs and the corporations were basically left trying to make ends meet and just survive. You had riots and violence that was just like raging through the streets. In 2011, the Mob Wars were over, and the mob was actually fully ousted from the local government and replaced by the corporations. By 2020, the city had become relatively peaceful due to continuous police presence, which is the Psycho Squad that Green had been talking about a little bit a moment ago. Though dangers do still remain, and the aftershocks of the Mob Wars are still felt from time to time. You'll see this often with what's called the Metal Wars or the Rust Wars, with the gangs kind of muscling in on each other. For most, though, despite the pervasive violence and poverty, leaving Night City is just not an option. Because yet, even though it's quoted as being the worst place to live in America, corporations are still selling the unattainable dream of making it big, and the masses in general are just buying it hook, line, and sinker. Night City is basically consumerism run rampant. That's the best way to look at it, because no matter where you look, you have a product that's being pitched to you, an aspiration, a dream that's being kind of dangled in front of you. And that doesn't mean if you're on the metro, if you're, the quote here is, whether you're riding the metro, brushing your teeth, or pissing in an alleyway, the glitter, vibrant color, and allure of it all sucks you in. So basically advertisement saturation is just constant. And everyone is in their own right a wanderer. No one really kind of has a home. They're just kind of these just self-wandering individuals. And Night City presents this undying hope for fame and success, where failure is actually the ultimate fear. So self-preservation and self-promotion are the driving forces behind societal advancement, not money. In Night City, in order to be someone, you have to be more than yourself. To become immortal, you have to become a brand, an ideal, which makes me really think of Batman. But it's a bad version of that. And actually an example of this consumerism, when I was saying consumerism has run rampant, you see this and we actually saw this in the trailer for Cyberpunk 2077. There's a team called the Trauma Team. This is actually a corporation, and I'm going to get to that when I get to the corporations too. But these are basically paramedics that are expertly trained in combat, and they will go to any length to deliver their clients from harm. And if you're wealthy enough, you can actually purchase what's called a Trauma Team medical plan. And you basically, when you purchase that, you get a chip and a card, or a card and a biochip implant. And what this chip does is that if it recognizes a medical problem for the client, it immediately informs a trauma team, who then rush to the scene to stabilize and extract the patient. And they quote it, "rain or shine, war zone or picnic." In 2020, this is where Trauma Team was kind of introduced. They had a guarantee of like within 6 minutes. In 2077, they're quoted as having a guarantee of within 3 minutes. So they've actually gotten better at their job, which is both scary and kind of commendable. And there's actually a breakdown on the trauma team, and it's like the crazy specs of what a average paramedic team from trauma team is equipped with is just insane. Like they will have the paramedics. So you usually have 2 paramedics, both with pistols for self-defense. And then what will often happen is they will be in a vehicle, and in the vehicle they'll have 2 pilots, 1 primary, 1 backup. Behind those will be 2 what are called security professionals, both armed with saws, which are basically, if you don't know what a saw is, it's a massive machine gun. And their jobs are basically to protect the pilots and, if necessary, to, quote, clear a path for the paramedics to get to their client. And they don't really discriminate when they're clearing a path. Their job is to get to the client, and that's it. So yeah, the trauma team it's like admirable, but also terrifying in its own way, because if you get stuck in the wrong place with the trauma team coming through, you're going to get cut. You're going to get sawed. The other thing that you see a lot in Night City is going to be the skyline, and that's where basically you see a lot of these what's called mega buildings, and they're a very, very prominent feature in the Night Sky or Night City skyline in 2077. And basically, what these do, they function like cities. They are basically cities within the city, and they're described as self-contained architectural behemoths that offer housing, food, firearms, medicine, and training. And you also have a quote that says, "Don't mistake them for a futuristic realization of a utopian society. These structures share much of the same grit, grime, and danger that are encountered out in the streets." So even within a good example of this, even within these buildings, if you have seen the reboot of Judge Dredd, which I'm not going to get into the analysis of the entire movie, but I'm just going to use it as an example here. The building at the end of the movie that Dredd has to go through, that's a mega building. That's basically a cyberpunk mega building. It's like its own individual fiefdom inside the city that could, like, it's just, that's the best example that I can think of.
It's also a little bit more akin to like what they were trying to do with RoboCop.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
because that was what, I mean, granted, you've been talking about like corporations being in charge, and of course this whole time I'm just thinking about OCP the entire time. It's basically like RoboCop's desire for, I think it was Delta City. That's what they were trying to like remap what Detroit should have been. But never
worked
happened.
Worked out so well for them.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that entire venture worked out for a few billion in losses, I think.
So, and to kind of wrap up the description of Night City, I'm going to detail out the regions that we do know of in 2077. So again, some of these districts are shared with what's kind of called the traditional layout of Night City that was seen in Cyberpunk 2020. The starting location for the game is a district called Watson, and this is an immigrant district. You see a lot of Asian-influenced rundown buildings that were basically once owned by corporations prior to their moving to a different region called City Center. City Center is the commercial district, and this is going to be the home of many of the mega corporations that you see in 2077. Then outside of that, we have Westbrook, which is basically also known as Japantown, and is home to the wealthy elite of the city. Haywood, which is a suburban area, and the note here about Haywood is that it is a upper middle class area. However, it is seeing a growing presence of gangs, and it's largely Latino. So again, kind of going back into that multicultural modge podge of things. Then we have the region known as Pacifica, which is basically, it's just slums. It's gang run. There's turf wars going on constantly. They're just the stereotypical slums of a futuristic city. And then finally we have the region called Santo Domingo, and that's the industrial district, which is where basically, that's basically the example that they've given, or the description they've given is it's an industrial district. Excuse me. Which actually brings me to one of the biggest aspects and interest points of 2077, the technology. Okay, so technology. The first thing to realize about technology in 2077 and the world of 2077 is that it's omnipresent. It's everywhere. It's used to automate industry. It's used with bombarding masses with all the advertisement that we were talking about. We even see it replace human flesh and bone with circuitry and steel with cybernetic enhancements. And basically this list just keeps going. And you'll see while cheap electronic devices and services are available to even some of the poorest members of society, most actually can't afford to buy the newest toys or replace broken equipment. So as a result, from a young age, many learn to improvise and work with discarded scrap to make repairs, to build their own diversions, and actually to craft their own weapons. For many Night City residents, the crushing poverty and homelessness are significant and likely inescapable problems. And so, as we mentioned before, despite this, most are still entranced by all the glitz of showbiz and the luxurious lifestyles of the privileged elite. Breakthroughs in neurotechnology have paved the way for people to share recordings of their own personal memories and emotions via tech that is known as brain dance, or BD. This is very big in 2077. Some BD productions put actors on stage situations to create, quote, false memories and to give viewers the feeling that they're living in an action film. Other BDs are simple recordings of a day in the life of the world's biggest and brightest stars. The ability to become a celeb and experience a life full of luxury gives many a chance to escape their own miserable reality. As a result, and this kind of goes back to what Green was kind of mentioning earlier, as a result, brain dance addiction has become an ever-growing problem for the city's poor. Also, as with all forms of entertainment media, illicit brain dance recordings, which are known as XBDs, can be found easily in the seedy underbelly of Night City's black market. The example here that makes me think of is from Destiny, is actually in the Mara Senna, when we hear about Mara selling the videos and kind of becoming a celebrity in her own right of that experience of being in the void. That's kind of a BD. That's kind of that selling of an experience for others to share in that experience without actually having to put themselves in danger. You also see that in the new iteration of Total Recall. They do a really good job of explaining that. So, and it's again, very common type of theme, trope, whatever you want to call it in science fiction. Star Trek had the holodeck. This is kind of the thing. Two well-known examples of all this glitz are actually seen in the trailer. We see Lizzie Wizzy, who is who's described as the controversial front woman for the band Lizzie Wizzy and the Meta Dwarves, which, interestingly enough, she is described as the only human member. So I'm kind of curious about where that one's going. And then Samurai, which is described as a legendary rock band for whom music was a way to rebel and fight the system. And so Samurai is very prominent in the trailer, where you see V, the male version of V, walking around with a samurai jacket. So the jacket that the main character that's walking around in that trailer with the really cool LED warmer things in the collar, that big skull on the back, that's the Samurai logo. So Samurai is just like, again, kind of going back into the punk theme-esque of this franchise. That's where they kind of see that, the pushing the boundaries and everything of the rock band. So that's kind of technology in general. One of the huge aspects of technology in particular in Cyberpunk's world is the net. You see this a little bit. This is where Cyberpunk kind of stands apart from the other punks. So you don't really have, you have a concept of a internet type thing in like Shadowrun and all these other things, but Cyberpunk really kind of focuses and double downs on this concept. And so the net is the name that's given to the vast telecommunications network of the Cyberpunk world. It's analogous to the real world internet, but much more extensive, and includes things like appliance and even actually their cybernetic limbs. The net is made up of hard lines, radio links, cell networks, microwave transmitters, and anything else that can actually transmit information from one computer to another. So it is basically the Internet of Things on steroids.
Can't you, is it like the Matrix where you can die in it type?
And so what you'll be, that is actually that's actually an icon. But in order to get to that point, we have to understand how to interact with your icon. And so while it is possible to access and use the net as we do today with devices that are referred to as vid boards, which is basically your green, you just made one, the 4 screen monitors, the keyboard, the physical keyboards, the mouse, and all that. That's called a vid board. Those are actual, like in cybernetics or in Cyberpunk's world, those are primitive. True professionals in Cyberpunk experience the net in 3 dimensions, and they do that by using a complex cybernetic interface that's called a cyber modem. These devices, which are often referred to by netrunners as cyber decks, provide an experience that is much more immersive and intuitive than the traditional keyboard computer interface. What that means is that this allows the netrunners to basically react far faster than would be ever possible with a keyboard. So a real world example is like the age old argument between DualShock controller and mouse and keyboard, right? Your mouse and keyboard are arguably going to increase your enhance your reaction time much significantly more so than a DualShock controller. And so that's kind of the similar difference here between a vid board and a cyber deck. While in the net, everything, I'm going to reemphasize that, everything is rendered into icons. And so what an icon is it's basically a 3D avatar that you control in order to interact with other stuff, which includes people, programs, devices, anything in the net. Icons can be as simple as a flat 2D monochrome shape, from that all the way up to a complete photorealistic human form. Most of the net environment is actually very similar to the movie Tron or The Matrix, but the quality of the rendering depends on the available bandwidth and memory. So it's actually possible to render a completely realistic environment, which, Green, like you said, is very similar to The Matrix. However, those more complex icons require significantly more memory. For this reason, the bulk of the net uses lower quality icons, where originally there were actually options to include one or to experience one of 3 unique interfaces, which were introduced in the Cyberpunk 2013. And those 3 were what's called Megacity, which is basically a 1930s film noir theme. They had a Dungeon and Dragons theme, which just sounds amazing. And then
also a little odd.
Yeah, just oh my gosh, but and then the third one was a Tron theme. It's actually called out as the Tron theme. In 2020, the UIs were eventually consolidated into one standard, and that was the Tron-like theme. So the Tron theme that you see, or you will be seeing in 2077, that is the standard UI. And what that means is that everyone who interacts with the net will see the base UI as that. The other important thing about icons is what this means is that everybody is able to be a hacker. Because what you're basically doing when you're hacking something is actually interacting with a real thing. The example that you see a lot of is in programs. There will be structures or icons called data fortresses, and they're literal walls. There are programs that are basically worms that will delve into the wall or make a door. And so the average Joe can actually go out and, if they have the money, buy a program and then unleash that program on the physical wall of the icon and literally hack their way into that particular structure. And by hacking their way into that structure through that icon, they are literally also doing what today you have to know coding to do. You can do just not knowing any coding, really. Which kind of comes to the next big thing, which is artificial intelligence. So AI does exist in Cyberpunk. And basically the net is the natural environment of these entities. And just in general, just like with most science fiction, there are many types of AI within the Cyberpunk series. Some are deliberately created by the corporations or the governments, and some are accident. And there are arguably even some that are emergent properties of the net itself. So far within the series, and this is the whole series, not just the video game. So far, the types of AIs that we've seen are called the first and the most basic is what's called a dedicated heuristic controller, or DHC. DHC is basically the base level of AI. These are designed to perform specific functions, and basically their focus does not stray from that function. Imagine a media player or a printer. Like, they do that, and that's what they do. That's all that matters. The next step up is called symbolic analysis AIs, and these are also called SAD AIs, SADs. These are AIs that are deliberately designed to emulate human behavior. And what you'll see a lot of SADs, you'll see these as artificial assistants in some form or fashion, secretaries, gatekeepers, what have you. That then brings us to the next level, which is human AIs. Now, these are AIs that were actually originally human. They were actual humans that have been digitized, and now they only exist on the computers in the net. So the problem
I've never
here,
heard that before.
Yeah, the problem here is, and this is also something that you probably never heard before, is that these might not necessarily have been voluntarily digitized.
I've never heard that before.
Surprise! The human AIs might not have been 100% on board with having their consciousness digitized. So yeah,
Cue the Nick Cage meme. You don't say.
What? Yeah, and so like these will be whereas the SADs are designed to emulate human behavior, human AIs will actually they are formerly human. So they don't have to emulate, they actually will have human behavior. These are often kind of the workhorses of the AI forces. That brings us to what's called Transcendental Sentience AIs, or TS AIs. And basically, this is and so these next two AIs are really kind of the arguable ones, because these are the ones that exist in myth. These AIs are what are called an emergent property of the net, and basically what that is that they are argued to be a natural consequence of how the net functions, and so they are basically something that was naturally created by the net. They are not controlled by anything. They are not. They were not created on accident. They are just there. And the Transcendental Sentience AIs, or the TS AIs, there's arguably one TS AI primarily for each quote-unquote region within the net. That gets into a large rabbit hole that I'm not going to dive into, because that would be like 5 hours in and of itself explaining. But yeah, so TS AIs are arguable on their existence. That then takes us to what's known as a Critical Pathway Plateau AI, or CPP. These are very similar to the TS AIs, but on a much smaller scale. These AIs are not debatable, because these are the AIs. CPPs are AIs that were basically, they came into existence by accident. What happened was a corporation or a government or whatever was programming an AI, probably an SAD AI, and something happened. A bug was introduced, a glitch happened in the code, and instead of deleting the AI, what basically happened is they accidentally created something more than an SAD, but not quite a human, and that's what a CPP is. So it's these really kind of interesting little accidents that are still around. So CPPs are similar to TS, but they were created, whereas TS was not created. So that's the net. A very, 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 very high level review of the net. One of the things that is also very prominent in Cyberpunk is the Cyberware. And so Cyberware are basically the cybernetic prosthetics that you see in pretty much every aspect of the trailer that we've seen so far, or any Cyberpunk genre content out there will have these. So the cybernetic prosthetics were originally developed for practical and medical purposes. in 2077, cyberware has become so commonplace that you'll see it as more of a matter of a lifestyle choice. So you have commonplace, like this is basically the tattoos and jewelries of the world. You have multitude of reasons for installing, including simple tech upgrades, combat enhancements, and actually there are even fashion statements, which you saw in the trailer. There is a scene where a woman is doing makeup and it pans out and she has no lower face because her entire lower jaw is actually hanging on the vanity to her left because she hasn't gotten around to putting the makeup on it just yet. I mean, it's just insanely detailed and insanely pervasive as far as what can be cybernetically enhanced. And so really what happens is in Night City, the possession of what's called trendy cyberware has become an integral and defining part of that culture. Uniqueness is identified as just being another form of currency. And this goes back to what we were talking about. To make it big, you need to look the part. Style is everything. An example that we saw in the trailer, again, kind of going back there, is something called real skin technology. And this is what is synthetic skin that is designed specifically to cover cybernetic implants to make it look like you don't have a cybernetic implant. So it's kind of like this you're showing
Graphing.
off by, well, it's great. I was going to say it's more like showing off by hiding. And so that's very thing. You'll see one of the corporations that we're going to talk about actually plays off the obsession with the trendy cyberware. That's their entire industry, really. It's called Chrome. It's chrome plated cybernetic arms. So there's an event, or there's a fad going on right now in cyberpunk.
Jax.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's chrome plated fad is what it's called. Denilar Technologies is entirely their specialty is what's called chrome plated cybernetic arms for women. And basically that is the majority of their income is entirely supported by what's known as the chrome plated fad. Within the trailer, you actually see this within the portrayal of Lizzie Wizzy, who is the woman who kind of gets out of a limo on a red carpet. And there's like all these cameras flashing, blah, 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 and she's basically chrome. She's 100%, looks like she's 100% chrome. That's what a chrome plated cybernetic would be. So that kind of comes to the other side of this coin. So, we're talking about robotics. Well, there's not just cyberware. There's actually drones and robotics. And this kind of this spans from live feed camera drones to sparring bots to massive warehouse machinery. So you're talking about anything from the stereotypical little spy bug to basically the Wallies, the giant Wallies that are in Wall-E that are dumping all the trash into space. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those guys exist or could exist here. So those are like the huge automated trash collectors, robotic street sweepers. If you're lucky enough to have a window, you can see these throughout the day. And so basically, whether top of the line or pieced together from scraps, robotics really just serve a huge role in both economic and everyday life. So in the economic sector and everyday life, robotics is a huge component of this. Most public transportation systems are actually completely handled by automated vehicles. Trains and buses they're basically practically entities in and of themselves, and they are able to communicate with each other and learn in order to improve efficiency. Really cool call out here is that this is actually another TED talk that I was just listening to was talking about if we can completely automate vehicular movement, you can actually have a world in which arguably there is no traffic jams, because the way that they are presenting that is if you look at what happens in a human body with your blood, there are infinitely more blood cells than there are vehicles on the road in today's world. And there is not really ever a traffic jam that doesn't involve an external source, which would be a clot, which, if you get cut and it scabs over, that's a clot. And so they're arguing that the way that they communicate with each other could be could be based off that communication device as well. And that's kind of what you see here with the trains and buses being their own entities. They are operating on a network that is completely independent of any other network, so they're able to communicate with each other and more efficiently move around the city with each other. And then on the other side of that coin, you have the military. So an example of the military is the Flathead, which is also the MTOD-12. This is actually seen in both the trailer, and then CD Projekt Red released a video of real gameplay. And the mission that is primarily focused on in that gameplay is the quote, reacquisition of an MTOD-12 from a gang who's known as the Maelstrom Gang, for a fixer, Dexter Deshawn, who will kind of get into the fixer's aspects here in a little bit with the political environment. But basically, the fixer hires V and a team to reacquire the MTOD, the Flathead, which is basically a Flathead is an experimental military grade unit that is designed for surveillance and reconnaissance missions, and it comes specially equipped with dynamic camouflage armor and motor impulses that rival the human nervous system. So in the trailer, you see this where they're in a aquarium bar. The robot drone that is sitting on the table between the group of people in that scene, that's the MTOD. In the game, like I said, you actually see the MTOD in action. Dexter apparently kind of drives it around. I haven't had a chance to sit down and watch the video for the gameplay. I've heard it's amazing. But you actually see the MTOD kind of demoed by Dexter in that game. Or no, he's demoed by one of the Maelstrom gangs before you take it back to Dexter. So yeah, that kind of is like a really rough summary of the tech that you see. I'm going to take a breath for just a second.
Good idea.
What do you guys have any questions on the tech aspect before I dive into the political aspect?
The tech aspect is the easiest way to say it is that whatever you can dream up, they're going to do it.
Yep. Fingers on cell phones.
God, that is such a stupid thing. I don't understand why. Like, it's not even useful. I digress. But with the cybertech, they can go full cyborg, like you were saying, which is kind of interesting, and it brings up a lot of like the philosophical questions of, are they still human at that point when they're going full cybernetics, or have they lost that? What's going on?
And that is, I don't know if the game's going to get into that debate. I know in the RPG there is some of that. Obviously, That's a very common debate in cyberpunk genre. Blade Runner. Geez, the new Blade Runner. Yeah, beard.
Mm-hmm.
Oh God, yes.
Are replicants people? Yeah, like that's a huge debate in Blade Runner. So it's a very common debate whenever you have AI, and in general cybernetics. At what point do you cease to be human? At what point are you more machine than man? Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if they're going to get into that. I can see them getting into that in the game, but I don't know what capacity they'll go.
In frank portions, I think it's going to come down to what path you take as well.
Then that's fair as well.
Just the way that they're kind of explaining this, it feels like it can be something that is very Deus Ex or is very Blade Runner.
Or what's the other? Detroit, right? Is Detroit the one that
Detroit
you play
become human?
Becoming human, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's several ways that they can kind of dip and go with it. I can see many different paths that we can all take, of course, when all is said and done, but... yeah, especially for how they're opening up this game, especially. I think that there are certain paths and certain things that you are just not going to see. Because you will, at least if it's going to be anything like what they're talking it up to be, with all the paths that you could take, it's going to be different.
Oh, yeah, and like when I get to I'm going to try to get to V. Hopefully I can get to it before we run out of time, because one of the coolest features that they have with character creation is actually dealing exactly with that. Mm-hmm. However, let's finish building out the world real quick before we dive into V. So the next big thing, the next big thing is the political environment. And basically, I'm just going to read. I kind of wrote up a little bit here that kind of dives into quotes from CD Projekt Red's website. So what I have right now is this kind of summary. I said, the world is broken. Following an economic collapse during the early 21st century, the United States was forced to rely on megacorporations, megacorps, to survive. These corporations deal in a wide range of areas: weapons, robotics, cybernetics, pharmaceuticals, communications, and biotechnology, to name a few. And many of them operate above the law. In Night City especially, megacorps manage every aspect of life, from the top floors of their skyscraping fortresses, their power eclipsing that of any world government. Down below, the streets are rung by drug-pushing gangs, tech hustlers, and illegal brain dance slingers. The in-between is where decadence, sex, and pop culture mix with violent crime, extreme poverty, and the unattainable promise of the American dream. Night City has seen its share of gang warfare over the years. The gangs that fill the city vary by structure, hierarchies, and backgrounds. However, all organized crime in this town is driven primarily by violence. Self-actualization through violence is a philosophy followed by many in the society, driven by an ever-present need to prove oneself. At the bottom, physical brutality settles most disputes. At the top, corporations do whatever is necessary to maintain both hard and soft power. Here, fear is king. An important location to observe and interact, if so desired, can be found in Below Deck, an underwater-themed club opened in a former aquarium. Gun laws are lax in the most violent and dangerous metropolis of the corporate-ruled country. Anyone can own a gun, and thanks to frequent riots and the daily threat of violence, just about everyone does. Open carry of firearms is both commonplace, and many even wear bulletproof clothing as they go about their lives, just in case. No one bats an eye at a pistol here or a rifle there. To stay alive, you need to look out for yourself, even if that sometimes means turning a blind eye to the constant violence happening all around. So yeah, it basically, the explanation of why your characters can have such powerful equipment equipped at all times is because everyone else does. Like, everyone else has it, so you need to have it just to protect yourself. And to call out real quick, Below Deck is the underwater themed club. That is from the trailer. That's where you see the MTOD-12. That's where Dexter kind of has his shop, or actually a lot of fixers are based out of Below Deck. So kind of gets us into the mega corporations. And
they own the government at this point.
Oh yeah, they own all governments at this point, to be fair, especially in 2077. Night City basically is described as a global center for mega corporation operations, and is actually home to a lot of the regional branches of corporate giants such as Arasaka and Militech, both of which were large founders in the construction of, at the time, Coronado City, which then became Night City. So Arasaka specializes in protective services and distribution of Japanese-made products throughout North America. Centered, they're kind of, their central point again is Night City. And over the years, it's kind of developed a dark reputation as a corporation that is to be feared, and which covers its tracks with a very, very heavy use of what's a profession called cyber assassins, an army of lawyers, and the Yakuza. Arguably, they obviously, quote unquote, can't be proven. Militech, on the other hand, is an arms dealer that's based out of the eastern United States. And what Militech does is they work closely with police and military forces and have basically substantially contributed to civilian security systems. So Militech is where Arasaka is kind of the underbelly, the seedy aspect. Militech is a powerhouse manufacturer of high-grade military technology, and that ranges from simple firearms to heavily armored combat vehicles. So Militech's more of the law, open in the transparent nature of, like, they are legal. Arasaka is kind of the more illegal aspect. And in addition to that, Night City is also home to many shops, restaurants, and decor that draw inspiration from Japanese, Chinese, Filipino, and Indian culture, among others. Some of the examples that we see in the trailer include Kirosho Optics, Cabana Foods, Fudiseki Electronics, and Masala Studios. And apparently, I don't know what, I'm not really sure on this one, but apparently there is some Maneki Neko figurines and Tengu imagery that are also seen in the trailers. I didn't necessarily catch those, but that was kind of the call out. I saw a call out on one of the Cyberpunk wiki for that, so I was like, I'll include that in there. Some of the confirmed megacorps that we know of from the Cyberpunk world that are going to be in 2077. The first one is, I'm going to just run through these alphabetically. These are not in order by importance. These are in order of alphabetics. Arasaka, which really is corporate security, manufacturing, and banking, which is where they kind of get their power. Is this they wield significant financial power. Arguably more financial power than any other single corporation, and they're known to often use subversive tactics such as blackmail, extortion, and bribery to influence events and the world around them. That brings us to Biotechnica. This particular corporation focuses on genetic engineering as well as microbiological and biochemical research. We don't know anything about Biotechnica at this point. There's nothing. We've seen we saw a logo for Biotechnica in the trailer and in the gameplay, but we didn't see anything other than that. That brings us to Dinalar Technologies, which we kind of mentioned with the chrome-plated fad. Their primary industry is cybernetic technology implants, Cyberware, and they specialize. What we do know about Dinalar is that they specialize in the chrome-plated cybernetic arms for women, which we kind of talked about again with the Lizzie Wizzy, as well as before. Then we have Militech, which we mentioned just a minute ago. Militech specializes in arms manufacturing, military vehicle production, as well as mercenary contracting. And they're described as the largest weapons manufacturer in the world and have an extensive catalog that is used by hundreds of nations and mercenary divisions. And its mercenary divisions partake in operations ranging from assassination to corporate security, all the way up to full-scale military operations. Keep that in mind because that's going to be important when we get to the corporate wars. That brings us to Orbital Air. Now, Orbital Air is an interesting corporation because they specialize in orbital facilities, which is literally space. So they specialize with maintenance of commercial orbital facilities as well as cargo and passenger transport to Earth orbit. We don't know much about Orbital Air at this point. However, we do know that they were involved in what was called the First Corporate War. So they are important. It is debatable at this point whether or not Orbital Air is still prominent, given some of the later corporate wars. But we'll get into that in just a second. Raven Micro Cybernetics is a corporation. Obviously, cybernetics is their main focus. We don't know a lot about them. We know that we have seen their logo. That's about it at this point. Then we have the Trauma Team International. We kind of talked about them when we were talking about the consumerism. They specialize in ambulance and paramedical services. And basically, again, these guys are the ones that specialize in rapid response medical services, and they stand as actually one of the most powerful corporations of the cyber age because of the premium paramedical franchise. Because they offer to protect you, they're actually very powerful because all it takes is them saying, nah, we're not going to do that, and they can get people to do what they want. And finally, the last corporation that we do know is going to be in 2077 is Zetatech. This is a corporation that specializes in wetware, which is basically computer hardware or cybernetic ware or cyberware, and as well as literal computer hardware and software design. This was actually a newer corporation. They were involved in the first corporate war as an ally of Orbital Air until they actually made the mistake of attacking a company or a corporation called EBM, Euro Business Machines. And EBM kind of slapped them back into place and knocked them out of the conflict. So Zetatech is in the process of rebuilding. It seems like from a failed attack in the corporate wars. So that brings us to the corporate wars, which we've kind of mentioned on and off. There's 4 primary corporate wars that we know of. The first one actually took place, and this is where you're going to start seeing the deviation in timelines from reality very significantly. The first corporate war took place in August 2004 to February 2006. And this conflict was primarily between Euro Business Machines, EBM, and Orbital Air. And basically what this whole thing centered around was the two corporations were trying to purchase another corporation who was in the process of going out of business, and it escalated like significantly. And so the importance of this war was that this presented the example to other corporations that using wholesale military style warfare against one another was actually a viable business practice. The first corporate war was the first conflict of its kind, and it actually led to other corporations following suit and fighting massive conflicts with each other over resources and business prospects. Basically, this set the precedent. This was the first time that we saw two corporations literally physically duke it out, and the governments could do nothing to stop them because of the economical situation of the global political environment. These corporations controlled things even back then, or even at this point. Which leads us to the second corporate war, which took place in April 2008 and lasted until August 2010. And this war was between two corporations called one Sov Oil, and then the other was Petrochem. And then this one, the big thing out of this war that kind of came about was that both sides just broke national and international laws throughout the conflict. They used armies of Pacific Rim nations against each other. They went as far as to depose governments and just install new ones that were sympathetic to them. Savoy particularly ignored the demands of nation states and just did as it pleased. Though it was after the conclusion of the corporate war, it was later forced to pay reparations to some of those nations. The other thing is that the entire geographic region of the Pacific Rim is pretty much gone at this point because of this corporate war, because of just the flaunting of power that they were doing. It's like the geography still exists, but it's so polluted that really it's not even worth being around. Which then leads us to the third corporate war. So there was a bit of a respite between the second and the third. The third corporate war was a really pretty short one. It was between February and November of 2016. It was a large-scale conflict, so there were multiple corporations involved in this one. And really, the reason that this one was so short, as well as not being significantly destructive physically, is that this war was nearly completely fought on the net. It was basically cyber attacks against each other. You see a bit of you don't see a bit of this war, but you see a bit of these tactics in the trailer. There's a scene where there's a board meeting and there's a guy with a head jack that just starts sparking and then he slumps over. That's basically a digital war. Finally, this is the one that we don't really know where it's going to stand, and this is the fourth corporate war. This took place sometime between 2022 and 2024, and really what started as a shadow war between Militech and Arasaka, which was it started as a political conflict between OTEC and Sino. It started in early 2022. Because what happened was there was a political conflict between OTEC and Sino, which were two world governments at the time, or still at the time, and Militech and Arasaka both kind of allied with either side. So there was OTEC and Sino who were in arguments, and then on either side also Militech and Arasaka were competing as well. So they were kind of pushing the political parties at each other. What happened was OTEC and Sino had actually managed to come to a resolution, even with the egging on that the corporations were giving them. And so what was a shadow war between the two corporations actually escalated in what's called a hot war in June of 2022, and then came to a head in 2024. And this is where we kind of were talking about this before show. This is where the events of Firestorm and version 3.0, the tabletop versions, they've been officially retconned, because basically the conclusion of this conflict, of this corporate war, was a nuke was being dropped on Night City. And so there was a very large problem with, hey, how are we going to take place 57 years afterwards if you nuke the city? So the fourth war is, to my understanding, the fourth war is still on the canonical timeline. We just don't know which parts of the conflict between Militech and Arasaka are going to remain fully in place within the storyline that 2077 is following. And that's the corporate wars at a very high level.
Mm-hmm. Oh gosh, I can't remember her name, and she was really good. There are a few lore YouTubers that go specifically into Cyberpunk, going kind of like in depth like you have, and one of them basically said the U.S. was reduced to a third world country thanks to the megacorps.
Yeah, that's where we mentioned, I can't remember if we were recording, but we mentioned the gypsies. Mm-hmm. There is an equivalent of the Trail of Tears with gypsies, and that happens in 2015. I can't remember. I don't have that written down, but there's a in the tabletop game, there's a very broader sense of what's going on in the global scene. 2077, the video game, is solely focused on Night City. So far, mm-hmm. we might be seeing other expansions later on, but right now Night City is the primary focus. In the tabletop RPG, since it's been going on for 30 years, it has kind of encompassed and explained what's going on in the world at large. So America is not the only not the only country that has been having problems with megacorporations. I mean, Arasaka itself, it was founded in Japan in the early 80s. I think it was 1983. I want to say off the top of my head. Or maybe that was when the major leader of Arasaka was born. Anyways, it was funded in like the 80s-esque. And so like they have since developed into a major corporation, a mega corporation that, is, like we've kind of been saying, is one of the biggest ones. But because of all the conflicts that are going on, basically what happens is you will also see in the cyberpunk world, there is no dollar. There is it's a euro, what is it called? Euro bill, I think it's like EB. I think it's EB is the acronym.
Right. It's like the dollar completely collapses, and then we get and then
the euro completely collapsed too. It's like all like in order to save it. Basically, what happened was, in order to save the economy, the global economy, not just countries' economies, the global economy, all the governments had to. So imagine the banking crisis that happened in 2008 in reality. Flip it. That's what happened. So the governments all went bankrupt and actually had to turn to the corporations to help buy them out. So the corporations actually pretty much bought rights to different areas of the planet, and then paid the governments to allow those governments to continue operating, and in exchange of autonomy in those regions, which is where you get Night City. Night City, Richard Knight was an individual who basically got tired of playing the game of business and used his wealth to purchase the area because Los Angeles at that time was pretty much destroyed. It was underwater for the most part, if I remember correctly. He bought the area. What's that?
Global warming.
I can't remember if it was global warming or if it was a failed attempt from a Cold War attack. I can't remember exactly what happened with it, but it was like Los Angeles was gone. Like it was pretty much gone.
The second edition of the tabletop adjusted some of their
when they moved from 2013 to 2020. Yeah.
For the Red War or the Red
War, that's right.
The Cold War.
The Cold War, yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm. So like there are events that like the Berlin Wall and all this stuff. Those still happen, but they happen with like strongly different undertones. And so where you have like all these where you had governments leading the corporations in our world, in Cyberpunk's world, you have the corporations leading the government. And so like Richard Knight was a kind of an oddity because when he purchased the land for Coronado City, he actually was trying to do good. He was trying not to not necessarily. I mean, he wasn't necessarily not trying to profit, but he wasn't like just trying to profit. He was trying to build a utopia. Right. and the importance with Arasaka and Militech, and then what's the other one? Petrochem. Those three megacorps are major sponsors of Night City, which is why Arasaka and Militech are they're constantly butting heads. Arasaka has a significant pull in Night City because I believe that they were one of the significant contributors, more so than the other two. But Militech basically funded all the corporate or all the police force, whereas Arasaka funded the financial districts and all that. And then Petrochem is because of the Second Corporate War, they beat Savoil, which was the Soviet equivalent of Petrochem. Because of their defeat of Savoil, they got control of pretty much all the energy resources, or the significant portion of the energy resources on the planet. And so they were, that was their aspect. All this compiled, Richard Knight gets killed in 98. I can't remember if he was, I want to say he was assassinated. I can't remember who organized the assassination. But in order to continue building Coronado, they rename it Night City in memory of him. And then that leads into the mob kind of muscling their way in, because at that time in the whole scheme of things, the corporations weren't as overt in strong-arming their way around things just yet. Because remember, in 98, the corporate wars hadn't happened yet. So the mob war takes place in 2009, and that's why if you look at the corporate wars, the corporations that are fighting the corporate wars, Arasaka and Militech don't get involved until later in 2022, because they're in the process of eradicating the mob from Night City. So like EBM and Orbital Air, that whole thing happened in 2004, 2006. The mob wars didn't start until 2009. And so then that's why a large argument is why the mob wars were even events, was because basically Arasaka and Militech were both watching EBM, Orbital Air. You had Savoil and Petrochem both kind of like literally duking it out. And then, none of these corporations really got in trouble. And so Arasaka was like, we can do that, and send in paramilitaries and just completely eradicated the mob for the most part through Night City. And then they brought in, then Militech came back in and all these other things. And so that's where the political kind of like this like jostling for position within the political spheres of Cyberpunk is really kind of fascinating, because you can see the play off of each other as they're playing like this 4-dimensional chess where everyone's watching the other people, because they're waiting for it. It reminds me a lot of the corporations from Dark Matter, because everyone's making alliances and betraying and all this stuff and doing like these soft things. And then all of a sudden this one thing will explode, and everyone kind of like stops, watches it, waits to see what happens, and then basically that sets the precedent for, and then it escalates. And that's where the corporate wars, that's why the corporate wars are so important in the Cyberpunk universe, is because they legitimized the fact that corporations could send in literal military they weren't just financially manipulating things anymore. They were literally physically manipulating things. You see, and that's where the Fourth Corporate War you see this culmination of it, because Arasaka and Militech, again, have always been, again, butting heads. And then this political conflict between OTEC and Sino starts. And if I remember correctly, it was over a resource battle in South America, I believe was where it was. And so Arasaka's like, oh, we want it. And then Militech basically sees it and counters them. And I can't remember if one of them, I can't remember which one, but basically the one tries to grab it, and then the other one's like, no, you can't have it, and is involved just to prevent the other. And so what these two are doing is they're pushing these two political governments, or these governments, into a fight with each other. And that comes to a head, and then all of a sudden, basically the equivalent of the UN basically manages to actually talk the two governments down so it doesn't escalate. And so now all of a sudden the shadow war between these two corporations is revealed. And instead of backing off, Arasaka and Militech go, all right, gloves are off. And they just go at it with each other. And that's where, in 2024, that's where the Firestorm storyline ends. And actually, if I'm remembering correctly, that's also where you get a device called I want to say it's the Soul Killer cybernetic bug, which actually will rip a person's, I think it like force digitizes them and then locks them in a digital cell or something.
Dear Lord.
Yeah, it's a really effed up thing, but Arasaka has developed this device. And so actually one of the last missions in the Firestorm, I keep on calling them expansions, and I don't really know what a better word for it is, but the one of the final stories is basically your team as the mercenaries are going up against the Arasaka, trying to destroy this device, and in result the nuke gets dropped on Night City, and that's all she wrote. And then that's when, in 2008, I think, whenever it was announced that they were going to come out with Cyberpunk Red, that was when they also announced that Firestorm and the majority of version 3.0 had been retconned. So you see a distinct break in the timeline. But that's also when they confirmed that the Fourth Corporate War was still legit and still in canonical timeline, but they haven't specified which aspects. So we know that a conflict between Militech and Arasaka has happened. And obviously Night City is still around, so it didn't get nuked, and that's really all we know at this time. Yes. Sorry, that was a random tangent that kind of dovetailed out of control for regards to the corporate wars. Real quick, I wanted to touch, do I have time? I think I have 5 minutes. I think I can run through this real quick.
I challenge you.
Okay, I can do it. All right, so you got playable classes, PCs. In Cyber 2077, you're going to have I'm going to talk really fast. You're going to have a significantly limited player class options as compared to the tabletop RPGs, which really should note
There's 9 different ones you can play in the tabletop, or at least there used to be 9.
Yes, there are 9. In 2077, there are 3. Now, what they are allowing is, even though you only have 3 major classes, you can jump between them as far as skills go. So the primary classes that you're the primary focuses, I guess you would call them, that you're going to have are Netrunner, Techie, and Solo. And I'm going to come back to those. So Netrunner. Netrunners are basically computer hackers. Imagine the movie Hackers, but basically with cyberdecks that are implanted in their bodies. And what they do is they use this brain-computer interface. They roam the net, and they basically look for systems to hack and information to sell to fixers, which are fixers are going to be major NPC contractors, basically. The major ability or specialty for a Netrunner is what's called interface, or basically the ability to use a device called the menu. The menu is basically a group of applications or apps that allow a Netrunner to run a series of interface programs within the net that allow them to do more at the same time. So it basically it's divide and conquer. The Netrunner is going to be best suited for players who prefer a stealthy approach rather than a physical or a more aggressive approach. Skills under this primary tree will grant access to mundane objects, doors, for example, as well as eventually more intricate systems, i.e. you can actually hack security, you can hack encryption, and eventually, supposedly, even other characters' brains. So that's going to be a really cool thing to watch. Techies are going to be your mechanics. They are basically the illegal scrappers. They are going to range from technicians to cybernetic specialists, so basically mechanics, to all the way off the record doctors. These are going to be usually portrayed as underground techies who do off the record work. They specialize in jury rigging, scrounging, and even some will have the med tech ability. This is going to be a player that is geared to be an engineer. Their skills are going to focus on building and using a variety of weapons, gear, and instruments to upgrade and augment their playstyle. Some examples here are going to be the drones and turrets. And that brings us to Solo. Solo are basically tanks. They are the hired hitmen, bodyguards, and mercenaries of the cyberpunk world. Due to the professionalism and constant training, they have an ability called combat sense, which basically gives them the capability to perceive danger, notice traps, and have an almost, quote, unearthly ability to avoid harm. Solo are mercenary characters. Their skills are honed and focused in combat, especially close quarter. So again, tank. That's going to be your tank. So you're going to have an option of stealth. You're going to have an option of basically construction or healer, I guess. Yeah, healer. And then tank. Done.
Mm-hmm. Good job. I don't know if you made it in the 5 minutes.
I don't know if I made it in 5 minutes. Okay.
You did real well.
So, and one final thing I did want to talk about V real quick. V is your character. That is going to be your character. Yes. It has been confirmed that
play as her.
Or him. This is a really cool thing for CD Projekt Red, actually, because they're taking a big step out of what I would define as their comfort zone. First off, you're going to be first person. Second off, you are able to customize the ever-living bleepity bleep out of this character. They have confirmed that you are able to tell a backstory. You are able to program in a backstory, which entails how you came to Night City, what your plans are for your character, as well as your dreams and hopes and aspirations, all which are
setting up your actual player character in the tabletop version.
Right. And the cool thing about this is those selections are going to flavor your influence or flavor your interactions with NPCs in the game. So when Beard was talking about like actual paths not being seen by people depending on their choices, that is legit. Like that is going to happen. Like you are going to, so not only are you able to like do like the Bethesda route of like completely cuts, and by the way guys, oh my god, it's beautiful. Like the customization options are pretty gorgeous. Like it's just now part of that, one of the biggest complaints is that it's a first person, so you don't get to see your character a lot except for cutscenes. But the trade-off is you get some awesome abilities as far as customization. But also as far as customizations, and I want to say it's background, how you got to Night City, and your dreams and aspirations, I think are the three things. I think there might be one more that I'm forgetting. But the important thing is that when you choose those, and you don't have to choose them, these are optional. So, but if you choose them, those will influence your interactions with NPCs during gameplay, as well as potentially opening up, different paths and stuff like that. So it's going to be really cool watching all the playthroughs of this, because from a story perspective, it's going to matter what you do. Like, and for me, that makes me really excited. Not only is it a solo RPG, but it's like you see these solo RPGs kind of growing as we see that in the gaming community. It's like over the years, we've seen them come more and more and more and more like tabletops. This is kind of, I'm really hopeful that this is going to be kind of another step forward in regards to that. And I mean, honestly, CD Projekt Red really hasn't disappointed. I'm trying
Witcher was so good.
Yeah, I haven't played Witcher 3 yet, just because time. But I'll be honest, I'm not a fan of the third person view. But the storyline is freaking amazing. Like I love the concept of Witcher. And again, CD Projekt Red, really, I haven't seen them do anything bad. Like, all their stuff is they don't put out content unless they're very sure of it. So I'm really hopeful that they're up there with Bethesda, in my opinion. Which, if you know me, that's a very high compliment.
High praise.
So and again, it's a solo RPG, which is like my wheelhouse. So I'm watching Cyberpunk 2077 very closely because it's going to be very, very dangerous for me. I'm going to definitely be watching the storyline. But yeah, so that, I mean, and that guys, that's Cyberpunk 2077. I think I made it below the mark for 2 hours. I'm hoping that I didn't bore people.
We'll be close. We will be close.
Oh man.
3 minutes to spare. 2.5 minutes to spare.
So pre-editing, I did 3 minutes. So I'm sure I'm sure I can cut a little bit of 30 seconds out.
Maybe.
Oh, all right. So shoutouts.
Shout
Beard,
okay.
Why don't one of you go first? I'm gonna go get a drink of water.
Yeah, you had a marathon there with this one. Shout out for me goes to, I don't even know right now. I did not prepare my shout outs like I should have. Beard, you go real quick and I will think. Quickly and hard.
I'm no help. I don't have any this week.
Yeah, Blue's gonna be real sad because I just don't even know. Saint 14's getting ready to do another charity event. That's something that is coming up.
And the Dames.
And the Dames. The Dames are doing their breast cancer awareness like they do every year.
Yeah, they're doing it. They're doing it different though this year.
Yes.
Correct. I think I saw a message. Sorry, Dames. I promise I will respond to you as soon as I possibly can. I did see the message, but they're doing it different. They're structuring it differently, and we will. Let me get the information. I will get it sent over to our Discord, as well as links to all that stuff. I promise I will get that. It's been insanely busy this week, so.
Yep, we're bad this week at the shoutouts. It's just one of those things like this genre. I know more about the books in the genre than I do about the game necessarily. And my very first tabletop RPG was GURPS, which I played cybernetic scion, like a psionic. Because why not? I broke the game so quick. Ta-da!
But yeah, real big shout out. I mean, shout out really honestly to CD Projekt Red. They have continued to impress me over the past few years with their stuff. I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do with Cyberpunk 2077, just simply because it's a storyline that's very interesting and it's just really interesting. It's been around since arguably since the beginning of the whole concept of Cyberpunk. And so I'm always glad to see like these older titles getting revitalized. Even though some of them will take missteps. We don't talk about D&D 4.0. But like
it wasn't that bad.
It was anyways.
Anyway,
5th edition was much better. I'm just going to say that. But like I mean like getting that revitalization simply because table RPGs just in general it just I don't know. I will always have a soft place for RPGs. And then Philip K. Dick is I'm a huge fan of his works in particular. So anything that's an RPG and deals with like Cyberpunk, Philip K. Dick, Blade Runner, all these type of things, I'm going to kind of be hard pressed not to be interested in those. But yeah, I think that's everything. Next topic, or this topic is appropriate. This month's topic is appropriate. I don't know. I can't remember if I said it or not. Bloodborne. So happy Halloween, everybody. Let's talk some Bloodborne. The only thing I think that would be more appropriate is Dark Souls, but we already did that, so we're not going to do that again. But yes, Bloodborne. Guys, jump into Discord and chat about that because it's I hear that it's very complex. So I'm really interested to dive into it to get it. So, but yeah, let's run through an outro real quick. We will obviously stay for a little bit of an after show and see you guys next week. With that, we'll begin to wrap the chat up. Thank you again to those over on Twitch for coming to spend your evening with us. If you'd like to join us for the live streaming of the episodes, please be sure to give us a follow over on twitch.tv/focusfirechat. Links to our episode archives can be found at www.focusfirechat.com. Please be sure to email us at focusfirechat@gmail.com with any comments or questions for our team concerning the podcast, and let us know how we're doing by giving us some feedback and a rating over on iTunes as well. Also, be sure to check out all of our amazing partner podcasts within the Guardian Radio Network over on theguardiansofdestiny.com. So until next time, focus your fire and may your light shine bright.